This first session, we are very lucky to have two folks from Harvard joining us. So they have stayed up late to be here with us right now. Annie White is the Director of Software Tools at Harvard Kennedy's Growth Lab. She has over 12 years of experience in sustainable development and research. Prior to joining the Growth Lab, she worked at Sustainalytics, which was a ESG research firm, and also at the International Food Policy Research in Washington, D.C. Research Institute, I should say. She is responsible for the database that we are about to get a tour of, the Atlas of Economic Complexity, which, if you can believe it, is even more interesting than it sounds. It starts with decades worth of data from import and export data from UN Comtrade, and then uniquely analyzes it and allows you all to pull country-specific, import-export specific data, either raw data, analyses, data visualizations. It's pretty interesting. Tim Cheston was joining her. He is the Senior Manager of Applied Research at the Harvard Growth Lab. He joined the Center for International Development's Growth Lab in 2014. Prior to that, he worked at the World Bank, specifically in social protection and labor rights. And his research has long focused on the role of economic diversification around the world. So please join me in thanking them for staying up late and welcoming Tim and Annie.
Fantastic. Great to be with you all, and wishing everyone a wonderful morning, and hope the coffee is pouring well. I have Annie is the showcase today, but I have the very humble task of trying to explain all of economic history in the next 8 minutes. So I hope you hold me to that clock. Fantastic. So we are the Growth Lab at Harvard University. We have a set of applied projects around the world, but we're also feature a lot of tools that that are open public access. And so they are free tools that we will highlight at the end of this presentation. But we do encourage you to really engage with us across many different ways in this pursuit of better understanding the economic opportunities to advance shared prosperity, both locally and around the world. And so, again, back to this kind of story of economic growth, I think where we need to start from is this basic understanding of what we call the hockey stick of economic development. That economic prosperity is not a permanent human condition. This is actually very much a recent development, that the majority of human history is marked by a very low level of incomes that has only sparked in the past, say, 250 years. So we need to understand kind of what allowed this spark to happen. Into these 250 years, we need to recognize that this spark was not universal. It was not shared neither across regions, much less within countries or even within specific cities and locations. So what I want to posit to you today is this question of why do we live in a world in which these two individuals engage in the same industry with such dramatic differences in what we might call technology, right? So why is it that, if I asked you to find a typewriter or an older technology, you might have to go to a museum, or we kind of pass on older technologies into the realms of the past. And yet, this farmer might be engaging in the same exact habits that existed a millennia ago. And yet we also live in a world in which modern production allows for these silos to reap this wheat and gain a much higher reward for the production you have today. So this is why do we live in a world that has such dramatic differences in productivity? And economists rarely agree on anything, and what economists agree on is that some of the old traditions of explaining differences in income based on different factors of accumulation by just saying, oh, some countries have more population, some countries have more land, capital, even human capital. Economists don't agree on much, but they agree that those factors cannot explain the differences in income that we see. It's actually this remaining factor that we term technology that is this nice, beautiful term that everybody loves to agree on and sign communiques saying, oh, this is a beautiful word, technology. But we need to dive deeper into what we mean by technology describing the differences in income that we see today. So what I'll posit to you today is that technology, as we see it, has three bases. We see technology as tools. Those are embodied knowledge. By accessing this drone, I have all of the ability to shoot this beautiful video footage without needing to know how to produce this drone. All of the aerodynamics and plastics that are required to produce this drone itself, I can simply access the embodied knowledge within this drone and fly it to access those that final production of those videos. A second form of knowledge we think of as codified knowledge. This is kind of blueprints. These are code books. These are recipes. If you just read and follow along the blueprint, you would be able to construct the house that is seen here. And so that is what we call codified knowledge. And so the question I would pose to you is essentially, if we can ship those tools across the world we can ship those drones and iPhones across the world on boats, and if we can put that codified knowledge on the internet and access it immediately, why does this difference in income continue to persist? Why has technology not been able to? It has to do with the answer to this question: what do you do when your tooth hurts? So of course you have your significant other go read an article on Wikipedia, buy some tools off of online and fix your tooth, right? No, of course. There's the third type of knowledge or third type of technology, what we call know-how, right? We go and we see a dentist. And why is it that we go and see a dentist? You know, a dentist has dental tools. A dentist has read dental books. But a dentist has a third type of knowledge, or what we call know-how, or that tacit knowledge from years of learning by doing, from years of repetition, that they have that know-how that is only held in their brains. And that is why we go and see dentists. And also how long it takes for dentists to learn how to do what they do also describes why your dentist is also hopefully not your lawyer. That we have different bits of knowledge that we put in different heads. And that is how, as a society, we are able to grow and achieve more, right? So we think of know-how as, you know, Rafa Nadal, or as a very skilled person in which Rafa Nadal knows how to return a 100-mile-per-hour serve even before that serve is served. And that if Rafa Nadal wrote a book and you read that codified knowledge, you read that book, you read that blueprint, unfortunately, your tennis game is unlikely to improve. You can use Rafa's racket and you're unlikely to be as skilled as he is, simply because know-how is held in brains and cannot be easily transmitted from one person to another person, much less one society to another society. And so we think, you know, often we classify the world, and we see here that we think of, oh, if we think of aviation, we think of flying, we often think of it as one key industry in which this pilot is able to represent that industry. But actually, we need to be thinking of the division of knowledge today as to say, if you don't have air traffic controllers, if you don't have flight attendants, if you don't have security, there is no aviation industry as we know it today. So we think of industries based on what is the know-how that is required for that industry to exist in a place. And so we think of know-how not in the individual, that one individual knowing more allows a society to exist or to achieve greater shared prosperity, but rather we think of the collective. We think of all of the necessary know-how that is required for an industry to exist. So we think of this farming family in Ecuador, and able to produce over 15 different varieties of agricultural products, and saying, I myself do not have that know-how. I would not be able to survive living in this community. So it's not that the individual knows more than other individuals. It is more the fact that the 15 products that this family knows how to produce are the same 15 products that other families in that community knows how to produce, that it's the same know-how within that one community, versus the fact that there is not one family that is able to produce a single product within this electronics store. And so we look at development not as being one individual being able to know more, but actually the diversified range of, or the spectrum of know-how that a society has that allows it to produce different items themselves. And so even, not one family can produce one electronics product, but even not one country can produce some of the most complex products in the world, as we see from this Boeing airplane here today, where the wheel well is produced in Japan, but the passenger entry doors are produced in France, and the fuselage is produced in Italy. So even some countries are not even able to hold the know-how necessary to produce some of the most complex products in the world. So when we think about this, what we refer to as complexity, it's also not about scale. This is a chicken factory in which the individuals in this processing line can be substituted. I can move the individual at the front and move them somewhere in the middle, and you probably would not lose very much productivity on the line, as compared to what we want to think about is more like an orchestra, in which if I changed the violinist to go play trumpet, you would immediately notice a very different sound coming from the orchestra itself. As to the range of know-how required to produce that sound, to produce that product at the end of the line. So all of economic development and this philosophy comes down to a game of Scrabble. And hopefully Scrabble has made it to the fellows there in Singapore. But essentially what we want to be thinking about is different bits of know-how, different bits of knowledge as being different letters, that then you combine those letters to produce different words or to create different products or industries. And so what we learn is that a society such as the farming society that has one single letter is able to produce one word, and of a word that is only one letter. That as we begin to add other specialized know-how, add new letters, we now with 3 letters can produce 4 words of up to 3 letters. We add a 4th letter, and now we can produce 9 words of up to 4 letters, and a word like cart, more sophisticated than what we saw before. And actually, if you get up to 10 letters, now what the Scrabble dictionary tells us is you can produce 595 words, and words like cartons, or what we have, glorias, much longer words of up to 10 letters that you see on the screen there. And so again, this process of economic development is fundamentally one in which societies are able to add new know-how, add new specialized letters that then allow them to not only diversify their production or produce more industries or more products, but also produce more complex or longer words, as we see there. And so this is not just some fun analogy, this is proved out with real data, in which we see that as a stylized fact of the world today is that countries that produce very few things on the x-axis here, and also on the y-axis, those are how many other countries know how to produce the same things. So essentially, poor countries are those that produce few things, and things that every country knows how to produce because they require very few letters. And we see on the opposite end are the advanced economies, which are able to produce not only more things, but also many things that very few other countries know how to produce, essentially because they require all of the letters are required to be present in order to produce those complex products. So not only do they produce the simple products, they are also able to produce some of the most complex products in the world today. So if we revisit this question I started with, again, it's not about the individual knowing more. Actually, the farmer on the left might know how to handle his oxen and produce his own local seeds in ways that the farmer on the right might only know how to drive and air conditioning and not even how to repair the harvester that he is working with. And so it's not about the individual knowing more, it's that societies grow by adding new know-how, diversifying what societies know how to do to be able to produce more diverse production and more complex production at the same time. And so then we have this question of saying, okay, so what does my society know how to do? Where is my know-how? And therefore, if I add an additional letter, what is the reward? What are the industries that are in that, what we call the adjacent possible of, potential diversification for my location? So what we define that as this space, what we call this technological similarity space, is what we term the product space. And so this is to map all global products based on their technological similarity of production. So essentially, two products that are close together in the product space reflects that there is a high probability, or here in green on the right side of the equation, which is to say, oh, looks like the know-how that is required to produce men's shirts is similar to women's blouses, is similar to men's t-shirts, and those are all near each other within this space. But then you have to ask, what is the know-how? Is the know-how to produce women's suits related to chocolate? You say, okay, chocolate seems like a very different production system, a very different set of knowledge. And then we say, where is cars? Okay, and where is a computer screen? And so this is the space to show the relatedness of different products around the world, such that we see different patterns of saying agriculture seems at the periphery, oil seems like the know-how of how to dig a hole, and unfortunately, very few other industries require the same know-how of how to dig a hole. But we do see that what this means is that the countries that get very good at producing garments actually are not the same countries that are able to produce electronics. That is very far away in this technological space. And we can learn a lot in terms of what your opportunities are in your place to diversify, because the know-how that you have is not equally required in all industries that you will need, that you have the potential to move into moving forward. So we can begin to place countries within this space and show what you know how to produce today that defines some pathways for you to diversify moving forward. So we find that Vietnam not only has specialized in textiles, but has been able to make a leap into the electronics and computer sector that we see in the bottom left. Compare that with Vietnam in the year 2000, and we see that this evolution has really taken place in the electronics sector. Indonesia now is within the textile sector, but has not yet made its way into made that long jump into the electronic sector, although it has some nice starting points that it might explore there, as compared to a place like Saudi Arabia or an oil economy that tends to be a very low diversified economy that has been able to produce oil, but has very few adjacencies, very few short jumps that it can make into technologically related areas that oil knowledge and know-how allows it to produce. And so from this mapping of what you know how to do today, we can measure how complex your economy is. And so we've created this index of economic complexity that is a useful index because it is highly correlated to explain the income per capita differences that we see in the world today. And you see the R squared here is an economist dream of anything above 0.6 is a very significant factor because it's just one simple index, one simple indicator, better describes differences in income per capita better than any other single indicator that we have seen out there, whether that be global governance indicators, global education indices are failed to describe the income per capita differences that we see today in the same way that we do find that economic complexity does here. And this is interesting not only because it describes differences in incomes today, but you say, hey, but there's some real gaps between the line here and where different countries are. And so you say, hey, why is India so far below the line? India should be up. If India were to be up in the line, it would be much richer today than it is. Or you say, same for the Philippines and other countries. That should be much richer. And then you say, hey, why is Greece so far above the line? Greece does not have the complexity that is required to show for the income it has today. And unfortunately, Greece has been one of the countries that has gone exactly in the opposite direction, while the Philippines and India tend to be countries that are growing quite quickly. And so we say, it is not that this method is wrong, it is that the world is wrong. It is that this method actually indicates how far you are off of the line, indicates your future income and predicts your future growth better than any single indicator that is out there in terms of economic growth perspectives. And so we do find where your complexity is vis-a-vis your income level today is predictive of your future growth. And so we have different growth projections that we also can make available to you, and we do freely on the website as well. So with that, with that preview, I turn it over to Annie to actually take us through a tour of this freely available website, atlas.cid.harvard.edu. Over to you, Annie.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Tim, for that great presentation. It's always exciting to come after Tim and his record speed presentation of so much of what motivates the lab every day. And so what Tim was able to show you in such a short period of time is really a lot of the questions, methodologies, and concepts that we work on at the Growth Lab. I oversee a software development team, which is a rare team to have in a research unit at Harvard. And one of the reasons why we have this team is because we believe that one of the best ways to disseminate this research is through, for example, web applications. And so I oversee a team of software developers, designers, and so on, who build these tools that distill all of this amazing scientific research into largely data visualization-based tools with really large data repositories that everybody can use. So as long as you have an internet connection, the Atlas is yours. I'm sure the group today will make sure that the link is circulated to everybody. So I'm going to show you a quick demo of what it can do, but I really encourage you to use it yourself and start exploring all the myriads of insights and outcomes that the tool is able to generate. So we're here on the homepage of the Atlas of Economic Complexity. Simply put, it's a tool that helps us to understand economic opportunity and dynamics for every single country in the world. So there are three key ways you can sort of enter into the Atlas and begin exploring. One of the ways up here is, of course, Explore. So you can come up here through Explore. And you can also sort of take country by country. And this is where we sort of give through complexity over time and what their outlook might be. And we also do annual rankings of about 133 countries every single year. And we rank countries based on their complexity. And it's really great to observe the change in that complexity with each passing year. We've been doing it for over a decade. So I'm going to start with Explore today. We call Explore sort of like the choose your own adventure section in the Atlas. So when you get here, you see right away, data visualization tends to be front and center in our tools. And we're prompt with one of two ways to begin exploring in this tool. We can choose a location, and in the Atlas, that could be a country or it can be a region, or we can also choose a product. So the Atlas covers, as I was saying before, every single country and region in the world, and it covers over 6,000 traded products and services. So I'm going to start today. Tim did a really nice overview of what Vietnam might look like in the Atlas. So I'll choose the country again today just by typing in the first few letters of its name. And what derives here is the country's tree map. And this is really a visual breakdown of the country's export basket in the year 2021. Okay. I can see this data over time, so I might want to bring it back all the way to 1996, and I'll see what that composition looks like over time. It definitely changes. We can see that between 1996 to 2021, agriculture takes a much smaller portion of the pie, and things like electronics really grow in size. We can also see this viewed as a map. So one of the things we try to do is to give our users lots of options in terms of ways to see this data. So here we're seeing Vietnam's exports. Here's the country in yellow, and its exports based on color around the world. It's also really useful to see this data over time. And Vietnam's an amazing picture to see in this over time. It just skyrockets starting around 2010. And here its exports really start to boom. One of the great things about this tool is what we're looking at right now is the sector level data over time. If I come into settings, what that is our 1-digit sector level. I might come in here and say, hey, I don't really care about all of these sectors. It's really just the services sector that I care about. And so that I can isolate that and see what just that sector looks like over time. I might say, great, this is good, but I want to see every sector except textiles, and I can just hide textiles and it goes away. So we always want to give people lots of options to customize what they're looking at. Another great visualization here is an overtime visualization, only this time we're looking at Vietnam's global market share at the sector level. And so once again, we see that the textile sector really drives that market share growth over time, and just following below it is electronics. One of the challenges oftentimes with countries is that there is 1 or 2 sectors that dominate this view. And so these other sectors down here at the bottom sort of get squished along what appears to be a very straight line. But if I eliminate textiles and I eliminate electronics from here, we start to see much more nuance. And so we can see, okay, also agriculture really has grown over the years, although there has been a slight decline in the last 2. And up comes metals and machinery as well. So we encourage our users all the time to play around with some of these nice filtering options so that you can really extract the nuance from the tool. So there's really 4 ways to visualize what trade looks like for a particular country. And if you recall, what Tim was presenting earlier was that trade data helps us to understand, and in fact, it's sort of a proxy to understand the know-how in a country and how that know-how changes over time. We can't go to every country and literally measure what's in brains. That would be amazing. And so instead, our tools often use proxies as measurements. And for us, that's Comtrade trade data that we use here. In other words, we think to ourselves, well, if you can produce it in your country, if you have the know-how to produce it, it means, or to export it, you have the know-how to produce it. And so the next question we try to answer in the atlas is, well, what's nearby to what you already know how to do? So we've established with Vietnam, this is a country that has accelerated its production of electronics and also textiles as well. And so what might be that image in the product space? So Tim showed this amazing diagram in his presentation of the product space. What my team did was take that diagram and turn it into a super interactive data visualization in the atlas. And so what you're able to do is actually hover on each one of these circles or nodes, and these circles are a product. So whereas products in the tree map were these little rectangles, now they're represented by circles or nodes in the product space. And when I click on them, what you can see is that they are linked to all other products beside it that are similar. In other words, if I know how to make synthetic sewing thread in my country, there's a high degree of likelihood that what's nearby that's similar to make, for example, is leather footwear or babies' garments. We can sort of see how those things are related. Another thing we want to do in the tool is say, okay, if we know what you're doing already, so we know where know-how exists in your country, and we know what's nearby to what you already know how to do, then what are some of the opportunities that exist? Or where might a policymaker, for example, direct their attention in terms of where production should happen next? And the feasibility graph is one of the ways we try to get at that information. So we say for a country, you want to find the sort of sweet spot of these products. So once again, every circle is a product. Only this time, these are products that the country is not necessarily exporting in a large way or at all. And so we want to choose these products that are sort of nearby or have a short distance to what I already know how to do and have a high degree of complexity. And that's sort of represented in this nice gray square here, any nodes that fall into that section. So it's not a matter of picking the one product that represents the best opportunity. but sort of using this as a directional guide for policymakers or investors who are saying, what collection of products might be good for my country next? I'm going to get rid of a few here that kind of skew our image. And I can see for Vietnam, if I look at products that are both nearby and complex, I'm seeing similar products as we knew before that are in garments. We already know the know-how exists there. Things in metals and machinery, and also in electronics and manufacturing. Okay, so a wide diversity of options available to Vietnam. Now, you might come in here and say, okay, right, we've heard it before, liquid crystal devices in the country of Vietnam represents an amazing opportunity, but we don't know anything about this product. Well, the Atlas can help you analyze on the product side as well, but then make some decisions and say, okay, if I went with this portfolio of products, what do their markets look like, for example? And so I can come over here, let me remind myself what liquid crystal devices is. The code is 9013. And so I should be able to come in here and select product instead of location. And now I'm looking for, there's my liquid crystal devices. And when I click on that, instead of seeing the previous tree map where we saw a breakdown by sector, now I'm seeing the countries where these are the exporting countries. So these are all the countries that are exporting liquid crystal devices. So I'm starting to get a sense of, okay, if I'm Vietnam and I'm thinking of beginning production of this particular product, here are the countries already doing it. In a sense, these would be my competitors. But I can also get a sense of who my import markets would be. So if I decide to make this product, who would be buying it from me? And here's a sense of who those countries are. And again, I might come in here and say, look, it's only countries in Asia that I care about as my import market. So I'll isolate just the Asian countries. I might say, look, include everything, but hide the Americas. And you can do that as well. There's one additional side here to the Atlas I want to show you. And just for fun, let's choose Singapore as a new country to look at. What's amazing about the Atlas is that it includes bilateral trade. So we're not just showing you what did Singapore export, what did Singapore import. We can show you what did Singapore export and import with partner countries. And so I might come in here and say, great, what did Singapore, what is the import-export relationship between Singapore and Vietnam? This is the import relationship. Here, the exporter is Singapore, the importer is Vietnam, and here's what that export basket looks like. That's a $10 billion export basket, fairly diversified. I can also come in here and say, right, I can do this by product, and maybe I want to know, for example, where did Singapore export textiles to? And here are all the importing countries. So that bilateral piece becomes very, very powerful in this tool. It's obvious to see how many permutations you can sort of create in this side of the Atlas and the Explore side. I'll draw your attention here to just the settings panel where we try to give folks as much option throughout the data as possible to customize what you can do. There are two product classes in this tool. So we've been looking at the HS 1992 product class throughout this entire demonstration. Some of you might choose an SITC product class. The benefit of an SITC product class is that by and large, the product basket is the same, except this classification goes all the way back to 1962. So you get a way longer time series with SITC. The benefit of HS is while the time series is shorter, it does contain slightly more modern products like batteries and circuits and so on. You can look at this, of course, by gross trade flow, by net trade flow, and you can really drill down on the detail level. So some of the trade aficionados in the room will appreciate that there are 6-digit product codes in this tool as well, depending on how detailed you want to get in the tool. Okay, and you can also aggregate all the way up to the 1-digit level. So start by building your visualization, whether that's by location, whether that's by product, whether it's exports or imports, and whether or not you care about bilateral relationships. and then get into your settings and really start customizing what that could look like. I'll point out here, one thing that's really great about the Atlas, we don't always have this capability in our tools. You can download the data from every visualization and you can download the image. And so we see this used in amazing ways, particularly in the press, actually. We talk to a lot of journalists who want to use one of our data visualizations and are able to grab the data and usually talk to us about how best to interpret some of those materials. Okay, I told you at the beginning that there were 3 big ways to sort of get into the tool. We just looked at Explore, which is the choose your own adventure of the Atlas. I'd like to take you to country profiles next. I won't go through all of country profiles, but it's really worth seeing this side of the tool. Let's choose Singapore here once again. It has a good country profile to review. So what we wanted to do is almost the opposite of approach in country profiles as compared to Explore. We wanted to create sort of a linear story of where the country is with its capabilities, know-how, and complexity, and introduce you sort of through a beginning, middle, and end of where the story could go for the country. So the front page for all these countries is always the same. It's sort of an overview of the company's core indicators, like GDP per capita, its economic complexity ranking. Here, Singapore is 5th out of 133. That probably doesn't surprise too many people. And its growth projection. The lab does 10-year growth projections every year. And so this is our most latest projection for Singapore. When we come to country profiles, you'll notice that it's broken down into 4 sections. So we start off by looking at the economic structure of a country, its market dynamics, its strategy, and then its opportunities. You'll see a lot of familiar themes in this section, as you did in the Atlas just now. So we start by looking at the country's export basket. But another thing we do that we wanted to provide in country profiles is not just what is the country exporting, but how complex is its basket. And so all we did was take that tree map we started with up here, and we changed this color scale so that high complexity products are sort of in this green color, lower complexity products in this orange color. And again, you can change this to gross or net, depending on where you want to go. We also are very interested in the lab around which products in your export basket are driving your growth over time. Ideally, it's from products that have really high complexity. And so you can see with Singapore, some of these products include electrical machinery and equipment, pharmaceutical products, and medical apparatus, all sort of on that left side of the product space and all involving much more complex know-how. So that's a good news story. Market share is the same here as you find in the Atlas. One of the measures we really like to study at the lab is, okay, so you have this know-how, you have this export basket. What in your export basket is new? So we think it's a really good sign when we see economies not only diversify, but introduce new products into their export basket. We have this nice little legend here at the top. This is for Singapore. So out of Singapore's entire export basket, 3% were new products that they exported over the last 15 years. And that represents 20 new products. By comparison, you can see China was roughly the same, South Korea roughly the same, and Japan was only 4. So depending on what country you're looking at, it could be the case that it has a really complex export basket or a low complexity export basket. But one question to ask is, of that export basket, what proportion is new products? We talk about the product space here. For folks who want another definition and diagram of what that visualization looks like, you'll find it here. We try to explain it as succinctly as possible. And then we get into Singapore's product space. It looks a lot different than Vietnam's product space, where a lot of the activity was sort of happening here in textiles and agriculture. With Singapore, it's a different story happening up here in chemicals, computers, and machinery. And so with that picture, we actually try to assign a recommended policy approach for every country that has a country profile. And by the way, we build country profiles for 133 countries, so not every single country has a country profile. It's usually dependent on data availability. And so we can see here, Singapore, we actually assign it to the technological frontier category. We're having exported virtually all major existing products. In other words, they've made them, they've exported them, the know-how is there. Gains for Singapore and other countries in the technological frontier actually come from developing new products altogether. Other countries in this category include Czechia, South Korea, Japan, the United States is in here somewhere, and Germany as well, Austria too. I'm going to choose a different country here just to show you how I'll go back to Vietnam to show you these potential growth opportunities that we're able to discover for the country. For countries that fall outside of technological frontier policy assignment, like Vietnam, which is a light touch approach, we recommend this sort of sub-basket of products that it might consider for production and exporting. And we also make sure that we give that to folks in a table form as well that can be sorted across all kinds of metrics that might be important to you. So just to go back to that again, one important thing about this is you might come into this tool as a policymaker or as an investor and say, great, as someone who's in Vietnam and thinking about its future growth, I'm prepared to take big risks, so long jumps. And if I do that, the portfolio of products that are recommended to me are actually a little bit further away and a little bit more complex. So they're slightly riskier. If I choose low-hanging fruit, it's a different basket of products because they're a little bit more nearby to what I already know how to do and slightly less complex. So they involve slightly less risk. By default, we always bring you to a balanced portfolio. And then whatever you choose from there, you'll see it in table form here. And then finally, a nice summary. The last thing I want to show you really quickly are those rankings that I told you about. So every year we rank 133 countries according to their economic complexity over time. And you can find those rankings here. They're really straightforward. For folks who are interested in learning about the methodology and why we choose the countries we do, you can get that methodology here. The data set is always available for downloading as well. This is a data visualization that shows each country that's included in our subset of 133 countries and their change in economic complexity over time. The most complex countries are here at the top, and the least complex countries are over here down at the bottom. So this is a really nice way to see change over time. Here's Vietnam, and of course you can see indeed that complexity for the country has increased over time. You can come down here and actually compare countries against each other. You can choose your time range, for example. We might want a slightly smaller time range here. And you can pick whatever countries you're interested in comparing to each other. I might add Azerbaijan here, I might add Argentina, Armenia, and so on. And maybe I decide to eliminate Ethiopia and China. So that sort of produces a nice data visualization that compiles the countries that you care about the most. And then finally, for you people who love a table and a table only, we give you that down at the bottom where we rank each country included in that year's ranking. You can find all the year's rankings here, all the way back to 1995. And you can come up again to the most recent year, which is 2021. Okay, and again, you can download it all. You can see change over 5 years, change over 10 years, and so on. We always try to supplement our tools with ways to understand our methodologies even further. So be sure when you're exploring the tool to get into our glossary. It defines a lot of these terms really, really nicely. Our data is available here. You can download the entire Atlas data set at a sister page called Dataverse, where you can get it all. And again, that's free for anyone who's using the tool. One thing I'll point out is that the most up-to-date trade data we have right now is 2021. Later this year, likely around late August, early September, we'll update it to 2022. A common question we get is, hey, it's 2024. Why don't you have 2024 data? And the reason has to do with the quality and the rate of country reporting to Comtrade. And because we require bilateral data in the tool, we actually have to wait until about 92 to 93% of countries report. And so that takes about 18 months after the reporting year for us to have a full and useful data set. So here we are in 2024, and quite shortly we'll be updating the data to 2022, and that'll be available in data viz form, downloads, and so on. So I think I'll stop there. I hope we have some time left over for questions. Happy to answer them for folks.
Hi, Annie. Thank you so much. I'm Pallavi. I'm from India, and I had a question about one of the points about diversification into new products. And in that section, you compare the economic complexity of the countries and how they're diversifying into new products while comparing it with other countries. I just want to figure out how those countries are selected for the data sets. For example, for Singapore, the comparison was with Japan, China, and South Korea, and for China, the comparison was with USA, Germany, and Japan. Also, is there a way where we can pick the countries we want to be comparing with?
Okay. The mic is a little bit fuzzy, but I think I got your question. And if I'm understanding you correctly, are you asking about the new product comparison set of countries?
Yes.
That's right.
Okay, perfect. And your question is about how do we decide which countries we compare to?
Yes.
Perfect. So it's a little bit of an equation we use, and we combine a few different variables to average out a set of comparison countries. We use a country's proximity to other countries. So it's rare that you'll see Singapore compared to, for example, the USA, just because they're geographically far away. We choose the country's GDP value. We choose the country's value of its export basket. And there's a fourth variable, it's export basket GDP, geographic proximity. That might be it. And we take a weighted sort of equation to come up with the set of comparator countries.
Second part of the question was, is there a way to customize it?
There isn't right now. In fact, your question is very timely, because on my team, what we're talking about is actually developing that equation as an open source just tool or script that people can download from our site. And I'll show folks right now all of our tools. The Atlas of Economic Complexity is our flagship tool, but we have about 30 to 35 different tools in our portfolio called growthlab.app or the Viz Hub. And we'll make sure that this is circulated to folks, but we also build software packages that we release that folks can use. So economic complexity software packages, there's a bunch of stuff for folks in here who use Python. There's lots of complexity work in here using Python packages. And so one thing we're talking about on the team is to release that script that we use to build our comparator countries. In which case folks can just run that outside of the tool.
Yeah, and let me just briefly add that you can manually search for comparator countries that you want to compare to and look at theirs and create your own table from it. But this is exactly the input we look forward to. This is at the Growth Lab, we're a 50-person team mainly focused on our applied projects, and this is exactly what the insights that you need in order to make a strong article is exactly what we look forward to in terms of improving these tools moving forward. And let me just emphasize that, Annie's point of, our value add is not to be the latest, greatest, breaking news about export changes over time. Our focus, again, is about, countries' long-term development is predictive of the know-how and the complexity that you have today. And so our focus on this site is to really compile comparative data for all of global trade to show that the know-how you have today predicts the diversification paths you have available to you, where diversification is the name of the game in terms of how a shared prosperity really is sustainable over time. And that different, know-how today predicts different ease of diversification moving forward. So we do find that India is in our top 5 in terms of countries that we predict to grow moving forward, because it has greater complexity than its income level today. Same for Indonesia that we saw in the product space earlier, that it had some bearings in the electronic space, but had not fully exploited that space. That predicts higher growth moving forward. So unfortunately, we're not here to reflect on some of the latest export news and developments, but we really do find that these established premises of where you have knowledge, where you have technology, where you have know-how, is predictive of your future growth potential.
Thank you. Any
I have one question. Hi, this is Kalogit. I was wondering to know, this is a wonderful system, no doubt. Before I get used to with these things, I would like to know if there is a way that you cross-check or verify these data that you're collecting from different sources, considering the fact there are many examples that the government itself also manipulates data if it's not in their favor. So is there any way in front of you to compare or verify? Thank you.
Tim, I wasn't able, there was an echo on that question. Were you able to
Yep.
get that?
I was indeed. Yes, we have a distinct. Yeah, the benefit of export data is that it goes through both the importer has to report what they receive, and the exporter has to report what they send out as well. So we have a kind of cleanliness or quality of reporter data that therefore benefits from not only knowing what the exporter reports, but also what the importer reports themselves. So the most frequent feedback we always get is to say, this does not reflect our national accounts, and we have to say, this is what reflects what you reported to UN Comtrade. And thankfully, we clean it up by saying, by rectifying what the importer reported versus what the exporter reported, what the value is. That then allows us this kind of double accounting that cleans up this data, but often does not fully reflect what the national accounts have. So we do recognize that there is a robust cleansing process that we undergo within the atlas itself that does not purely recognize what you neither reported in your national accounts nor to UN Comtrade, but that does reflect what we do find is that, and the second question there will always be, therefore we only show what are product goods, because unfortunately services do not pass through customs, do not pass through neither export reporting nor clear importer reporting. So as we saw from Vietnam in the visuals there, we have some unspecified or kind of some reporters who are not as good at specifying some of their services side of the equation. Annie might highlight that we have a different tool that actually is focused much more on cities called the Metroverse. That might be a really interesting tool for many in the audience to say the same reflection of economic complexity is applied to cities, cities globally. And therefore, we can show what your city knows how to do, and therefore what your city might have potential to move into. But that city space also includes what we call the industry space that reflects not just goods, but service trade with some of the same, a different data set at its core that will allow services to come into the equation, but with the same veracity of the data that we report on the atlas itself. So it unfortunately does not allow you to kind of customize or reflect your perfect national accounts, but we do try to acknowledge that there are some biased reportings of export and import data that are reflected in the accounting of the atlas itself.
Yeah, so just to follow up on what Tim was saying.
I may follow up on my question. I was interested in the complexity index is really weighted to the countries with which you measure imports and exports, as opposed to the size of the domestic economy. That's question one. Question two is, within the product categories, do you also identify the number of production units, the number of companies that are participating in the individual product? For example, you may have a very large export of PCs from Vietnam, but only done by one company, as opposed to multiple companies, with which would be a more complex team process. Thank you.
Yeah,
Tim, do you want to take the first question? I can do the second.
Yeah, both perfect questions.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so they're both intimately related. Remind me of the first question.
It is the complexity index is weighted to
Right.
countries.
Yes,
Okay.
yes, exactly. Thank you for that. So we do find that is a meaningful process, which is to say, we find that often some of your most complex exports are exported to your neighbors, or exported actually to some low complexity settings in which many, either landlocked countries or others can actually afford a lower quality of product because it is so costly to send it to their landlocked neighbor, versus some of your most complex products go to your neighbors, versus some of your least complex products go to some of the most advanced economies globally. And so we do find that there is this kind of arc of competitiveness with which Indonesia might export a very different set of goods to Australia than it does to Cambodia. And so that is fully able to be explored in the atlas itself. But it's certainly, we do continue to find that geography matters in terms of your neighbors matter. And actually, we find that that again, these know-how channels of how you come to find out how to produce computers still is dependent on whether your neighbors are able to produce it, whether your business relationships have that know-how. These kind of networks are not fully geographic dependent. They're actually more dependent on these vectors with which know-how moves across different parts of geographic space, such that your business networks matter. So we do find that the export destinations certainly continue to matter. But actually, what we find is more important is on the production side of who knows how to do things, actually begin, and your relationship to those partners actually begins to predict whether you're able to move into other products. And so we have a paper on what we call the country space, which shows that what know-how you have and what partnerships you have begins to predict your ability to diversify and move into different spaces.
And I think there was a second part to your question where you were asking, in this tool, we account for the export of products and the proportion of those exports, but do we account for the fact that at the firm level, a single firm could be responsible, for example, for the majority of, for example, 4% of diamond exports? In the atlas, we don't, if I understand your question correctly, in the atlas, we don't account for firm level data. So you won't really get that granular sense of who was responsible precisely for a particular product export in a given year, many firms or a small number of firms. However, when we get to Metroverse, which is our city-based tool, we do analyze cities by firm data. So if I come into Singapore, for example, this is Metroverse, by the way, and this is a newer tool for us. We consider it a prototype. If I come into Singapore's city profile, I can come in here and say, well, what is my city's economic composition? So here it is, the tree map again. It looks awfully familiar to the atlas, except here we're not looking at products anymore. We're looking at industries. And I can find all kinds of industries here in this graph. And what's amazing about this is it is represented by firm size, whether that's by employees or based on establishment count. This is also an imperfect data set, by the way. However, for a lot of cities, what really matters is the informal economy, and this tool can't really capture that. We're using Dun & Bradstreet firm data, and it unfortunately doesn't always cover that level of granularity. The other thing that you'll notice here is that the coverage of our tool, as seen on this map, we're happy to have launched a prototype with 1,022 cities worldwide for comparison, but data availability at the firm level is really hard in certain regions of the world. And so a big task we have over time is improving our acquisition and cleaning methods so that we can start adding some of these African cities, some of the Middle Eastern and Russian cities as well.
Hi, thanks. This is Delta from Taiwan's Commonwealth Magazine. I have two questions, and the first one is, I'm not make you to break the rule of the One China policy, but I'm just wondering, would you consider to put Taiwan's data on your dashboard, especially under the category of the country? And that's the first question. The second question would be, do you open the public to query your data by like API or repo on GitHub? Thanks.
Great. So Taiwan is an acknowledged country in the Atlas, and it's here separate from China. And then in country profiles, if I'm not mistaken, Taiwan does not have a country profile. That's probably due to some of its reporting, but China does. But I think the most important aspect here is that we treated them as separate entities in the Explore section. So they can be analyzed as completely separate entities as well. We don't have a public API for the Atlas. It could be coming down the road. And some of the code is available in as open source in our GitHub, on our GitHub page. But really the most access we give to users is downloading the data set entirely.
Annie and Tim, thank you so much. This is fascinating. I know a number of fellows were already playing around with it. I hope you were looking at your own countries and continue to do so. And as with the other speakers, their information is in your agenda. So you have ways of accessing and getting more of this information. So Annie and Tim, thank you again so much for joining us.
Thanks, everyone. Have
Absolutely.
a great day.
We're available. Email us. We'll talk soon.